So second presenter is Darren Was. He's doing his second year licentiate at the Pontifical Athenaeum. Over to you, Darren.
So, respected chairperson, co-speakers, scholars and dear friends, my paper is titled The Rise of Ethics in Buddhist and Levinasian Philosophy, a comparative study of Buddhism and the ethics of alterity. As a time constraints, I'll also be skipping a major chunk of my paper, but I'll try to present a brief short summary of my paper. Basically, I just want to give some introduction that Buddhism, the first principle of Buddhism is dukkha, and or dukkha is caused by impermanence. So the very existence or the very reality of existence is impermanence. And to get rid of this impermanence, that we have to be ethical, we have to follow the ethical dhamma of Buddhism. So this paper probes into this lacuna or the intellectual lacuna or the don't know space of this Buddhism. If everything is impermanent, then how can we have ethics in Buddhism? Because the very foundation of ethics is permanent principles. I find a similarity between this Buddhist philosophy and the ethics of alterity proposed by Emmanuel Levinas, because there also Levinas also makes a leap between the self and the other. The very moment I see the face of the other, I have to be responsible for the other. So again, there is a lacuna, how Levinas makes a leap from the self to the other. So this paper is a probe or an attempt to explore into this lacuna in the Buddhist and Levinasian philosophy. Okay, so the Buddha in the first sermon itself, that he placed dukkha as the first principle of Buddhism, and we know that dukkha, desire is the cause for dukkha, and it has to be warded off, it has to, and by using the marga. And in the second sermon, Buddha is elaborating the first principle of Buddhism called dukkha by bringing the interdependent characteristics of dukkha, and that is the three marks of existence, or it is called the three lakshana, that is anitya and anatma. It is all correlated. There is a correlation between these three marks of existence, because Buddha speaks the existence or the reality of existence is simply anitya. It is simply impermanent. So the world is rather a constant stream of change, an oscillation between existence and non-existence. So how, if everything is impermanent, and it says that everything is constantly mutating, that is the existence, or that is the very heart. For example, like the moment I speak to you, at this 1 second, in this 1 second, maybe 100 million of my cells might have been mutated. Not might have been, it has mutated. A lover of today can, in a course of time, can become, she or he can go into a breakup, or a friend can turn into an enemy. So everything is mutating, or everything is changing. That is simply the principle of anitya, or impermanence. The second lakshana, or the mark of existence, dukkha, is a correlative of this impermanent nature of existence, because the very refusal to accept and realize the changing nature of reality is the underlying reason that pushes us into the state of misery. We project the fiction that all things are real and abiding, and this is what pushes us into the deluded understanding, and this is what causes the suffering or the misery. For example, at the very moment I go down, I suffer when I have a breakup, because I refuse to accept that my lover has changed, or I refuse to accept the point that I myself have changed. So it's the impermanence that pushes us into the second correlated or characteristic called dukkha. So if everything is impermanent, and if the essence of impermanence is misery, then in the ardent attempt of warding off this misery ends up in creating an illusion of impermanence. That is, like we attempt to ward off this impermanence. We think that we suffer because of impermanence, so we try to ward off this suffering by warding off the impermanence, by creating an illusion of impermanence. That's how he leads to the third principle of anatma, or no self. And here we have to, the very self in Buddhism, the understanding of self is formed by the aggregates or the five skandhas, or the theory of dependent origination. The self lacks the very inherent extinction in itself. So okay. So it is important to note that in Buddhism, a Bhikkhu Bodhi, in the book of Bhikkhu Bodhi, it speaks about the wanderer Vachakota questions Buddha. Is there a self, or is there no self? For which Buddha was silent, and later when Ananda asked about his silence, Buddha replied, there is a self, that with the arising of the knowledge that all phenomena are non-self. So here Buddha posits that all things are empty of intrinsic existence, which is the doctrine of shunyata. The idea of self is a result of mere interconnectedness, and there is no self is a truth of reality. So the Trilakshana, according to the words of that Keith Eberhard, an Indian scholar and a Sanskrit scholar, he simply states in one sentence, whatever is impermanent is misery, and whatever is misery is not the self. So how can we ward off this? How can we come out of this misery? And Buddha proposes the middle path and the eightfold path, the right action, right livelihood. So here comes the question of my paper, that how can Buddha propose this ethics or dhamma when the reality is impermanent? So we'll keep the question for time being. And moving to the philosophy of Levinas, ethics of alterity. In the book Totality and Infinity, Levinas speaks about the epiphany of the face. The very face of the other opens up before you as an infinite other, which cannot be grasped or appropriated, but to be appreciated and responded. So he says that sensibility is not a fumbling objectification. There is a human tendency, the very moment I encounter the other, I try to grasp, I try to comprehend himself and try to analyze and put him in my own unified way of understanding and my own single framework. But the ethics of alterity, Levinas challenges this question of totalitarian understanding of the other, but he says that sensibility is not a fumbling objectification. So Levinas also, he goes to the extreme and says that he breaks up this idea of totality, but at the same time, it is in the other, it is in the encounter with the other that you find yourself. For example, he says in Totality and Infinity itself, he gives the example of color. We always find ourselves in exteriority. For example, how we understand the concept of black, we always understand as blackboard, or how we understand a noise of a car, a voice of someone. So it is in exteriority that we understand something. So for Levinas, the very I is formed in the face of the other. Very I is formed in the encounter with the other. But the very encounter with the other will always challenge my totality. It destabilizes my being. So the other, who is completely different and a unique being, is beyond my grasp, and this challenge posed by the other destabilizes me in causing a trauma or a vertigo. So the face-to-face encounter with the other, it destabilizes me, it disturbs the totalizing grasp of reality, but it produces a positive vertigo to reinvestigate and to redefine me as an ethically responsible person. So the very subjectivity is not a self-contained entity, but it is exposed to alterity, the other. The ego has to take the pain of vertigo or disruption in the intentional movement to posit itself in itself and for itself. That quote is from Otherwise Than Being on Beyond Essence by Levinas. So the best way to encounter the other, according to Levinas, is letting be. Let the other to remain as it is. Levinas discusses, he gives the example of language where he calls about the letting be. For example, the poetic language, when a poet writes, it is not a unified, a singular meaning, but rather it changes from reader to reader. It changes from context, it changes according to the circumstances. So even though the word is one, the meaning that it conveys is more than one. So the other is similar to this. It has not to be read in a singular sense, but it has to be understood, it has to be identified, and by allowing the other to let himself or herself to be, to reveal, it's a point of, rather than grasping, it's an occasion to wonder about himself. So, and also in totality, it says, no, totality remains a necessary illusion. The very idea that you can grasp the other, the very idea you can unify the other into a singular concept is an illusion. So the very best way to encounter the other, according to Levinas, is letting be. And the ethics will come. The very face-to-face encounter with the other makes me ethical. This is a Levinas's crux point. So there is a psychologist called Brentano, and there is a thesis called Brentano's intentionality thesis, which says that the mind is always intended towards some other object. Similarly, we as a human beings, we also are intended towards some other. We need somebody, we need a partner, we need a friend, or we need somebody to live on. So the other, it opens up in the height of transcendence, and he opens up as irreducible, incommensurable, but at the same time, it also reveals in humility and it's in vulnerability of the need of the other. So the very moment the other reveals before me as naked, as humble, and as a someone who needs, that possesses me, that makes me responsible for the other. There is a very nice image from his book that's tearing away of bread from the mouth that tasted to give it to the other. This is an expression given by Levinas. So the other's face, other's vulnerability makes me myself to share the bread I have in my mouth and to give it to the other. So where you be open to the other, so the very relation is asymmetrical. You are open to the other without mutual obligation, but with a passive acceptance and an active responsibility. So here, we become a beyond being, a transcendent being. That's what he explains in Alterity and Transcendence. The encounter with the other helps me to be separated from the things of the world, the intelligence of this world, and to gather to oneself and to hear the voices from on high. Hear the myself, the very face where the encounter makes me a transcendent being, a beyond being. Okay, now quickly we'll look through the resonates between Buddhism and ethics of alterity. It's simple that Buddhism is a journey from dukkha to nirvana, and in this process, ethics comes in, and the Dhamma comes in as a means to transcendence. And if you check the Levinasian philosophy, it's a journey from vertigo or trauma of astonishment to the transcendence. And here also, the means to transcendence is ethics. And in Buddhism, the right practice of Dhamma in Buddhism or the middle path give you realization as an anatman or no-self. So the realization of anatman makes you an enlightened one and thereafter to attain nirvana. Similarly, in the ethics of alterity, you become a beyond a transcendental being by responding ethically, asymmetrically to the other. In other words, the self-effacing of self-effacing helps you to break the limits of yourself and to be a beyond being. So these are the some similarities between Buddhism and ethics of alterity. But the question remains, how Buddha makes a jump or a leap from impermanence to permanence, or how Levinas makes a leap between the self to the other. I try to fill this gap with a notion proposed by the poet John Keats in a letter wrote in 1817 to his two of his brothers, George and Thomas, a very the romantic poet who had a literary career of just 3.5 years, but a prolific writer who had written about 150 poems. So in that letter, he speaks about a concept of called negative capability, where a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. So practically, it is the capacity of a human being to move in life in anitya, in uncertainties, when the things go around, in suffering. So basically, negative capability is a counterculture to the human tendency of falling into illusory fixities. In Buddhism, we saw that we try to ward off the illusory, the impermanence or the dukkha by making a self, by creating a permanent thing. So this is a counterculture that speaks again, that stands against this human tendency of falling into illusory fixities. Rather, it helps to accept the validity of being in the uncertainty. So being in this world is not rooted in the certainty of the self or in one's clinging to fact and reason, but lies instead an openness to what one cannot know and invites a mode of response proper to that. It's a famous quote from Toad. So basically, if we go a little further, negative capability is that capacity of human being to exist, to be a being without. It invites to shift our attention away from the illusory certainties of knowing and doing. So being without, basically it's an invitation to empty ourselves, as the concept of shunyata in Buddhism, as which lacks an inherent existence, to suspend the habitual thinking, the way I think, the way I do, the way I let things to be. So it is a capacity of human being to get rid of these things. So being without is an experience of shunyata, when one gives himself up, where one realizes that there is no intrinsic existence or anatman. This giving up makes you transcend the illusion and to attain nirvana. So for Levinas, it is in the self-effacing, one becomes an ethical being, a transcendent and beyond being. So it is through this aspect of negative capability or being without that Buddha or Levinas maybe try to bridge the don't know space. The ethics rise from this very capability or this counterculture of human beings to move to the very impermanence of reality. So,
Last 2
thank you.
minutes.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.